Hello everybody and welcome to the bus stops located outside of York railway station. Now if you watch my journey up here on Great Western Railway and cross country, you will know how and why I'm here. However, just after that and pretty much straight after I got off the train, I decided to have a look at York's public transport, or rather York's bus system, as that's the only public transport system they really have here. So I just decided to have a look at some of the buses and some of the operators that operate bus services around the city. Now, my first and a couple of my buses actually would be operated by First York, who, apart from the training buses, one of which I saw later on in the video, the whole fleet is fully electric, which is great, but also it would have been more interesting if they still had some of the older buses that they used to have, such as the Mercedes-Benz Citaro bendy buses that used to operate on the park and ride here. Anyway, here I am on my first bus service, which just so happened to be operated by First York, and this is one of the many Right Street Deck electro liners here in service in York. I was planning on taking this on the 4 all the way to Acomb, but ended up just getting off before Acomb so I could cross over the road and get another bus heading back into the city centre.
To Clockhouse.
Here I am somewhere not too far away from Acomb, but it definitely isn't Acomb. Now the reason why I hastily got off that Right Street Deck is because a lot of the first bus services, namely the one bus service which I was planning on taking to get back from Acomb into York City Centre, was running ridiculously late. So I decided to get across the road and get on one of the few Optare Metro Decker EV buses they still have in service here in First York. There are a few of these in the first ultraviolet livery, but most of these, especially on the interior, still have First York Park and Ride branding, and I think these look incredibly smart in both the York Park and Ride and the first ultraviolet liveries. I've never been on an Optare Metro Decker before, and I thought at least the electric version was extremely nice, and it went incredibly quick, faster than most of the other electric buses I've been on. Anyway, I'm going to take this back into York City Centre at the rail station. Here I am getting off the bus on Blossom Street, just outside my hotel and just around the corner from York railway station. Apparently this was the closest this Optare Metro Decker on Service 4 could get to York railway station, as it had to go on diversion from here. I'm not too sure why, as none of the other buses that went from here to York railway station actually went on diversion at all, so that still remains a mystery. Whilst I was walking through York city centre to get to my next bus service, I saw this Volvo B7RLE Eclipse Urban, which was training for First York. It was quite a nice surprise to see this bus. Anyway, there goes that City Sightseeing York normal Transdev coastliner Volvo B9TL Eclipse Gemini 2, which I was planning on getting later on. As you'll find out, things didn't really go to plan. I'm surprised that this bus is for some reason in the York City Sightseeing livery, as I don't recall seeing it on the York City Sightseeing service, and for the whole time I was there, it was just on the coastliner services, so that's a bit of an odd one. Anyway, here I am on my next bus service, which was the 40 to Easingwold. This is also operated by Transdev, but under the York and Country brand rather than the coastliner brand. I'll be taking this as far as Wiggerton on the 40. This was operated by a very nice Volvo B7RLE Eclipse 2 in the Transdev Go livery.
Stop is Astley and Roundtrees. Stop is Clifton Gate. Get off here for the Web Adventure Park.
arriving into Wiggerton, which is located just outside of the outskirts of York. There goes that Volvo B7RLE on the 40 service for Easingwood, which sometimes get very interesting buses such as B7RLEs and B9s. However, my bus on the return journey into York City Centre was a standard York and Country ADL Enviro 200 MMC with the fan going like mental. I'll be taking this back into York City Centre, kind of close to the railway station on Station Avenue. After getting off that York and Country 40 service near Station Avenue and the city walls, here I am back at York railway station itself for my next bus. Now it was supposed to be a Connections Buses Scania N230UD on the city double-decker. However, I think it ended up breaking down because in the end they swapped it for the Scania N250UD ADL Enviro 400 MMC. It was still quite nice to get a Scania on the Super 13 service, and although it had Connections Buses logos on the side, it was actually in the old Stephensons of Essex livery. I'll be taking this on the Super 13 service to Cotmanthorpe.
Next stop, Blossom Street.
After having a nice fast section on the Super 13 route on a nice dual carriageway, here I am now in Cotmanthorpe after having a nice ride on that Scania N250UD. Now my next plan was going to be to get the Volvo B90L that we saw earlier in the City Sightseeing York livery on its return journey into York, and then the bus would continue on to Moulton, where it would then finish for the night, I think, or it might have gone back to Leeds. But it didn't matter anyway because the service ended up getting cancelled, and I didn't realise until I walked one stop down the road as I was getting a bit bored waiting for the bus. That was a bit of a shame. However, one thing I didn't realise and that I should have checked is that the bus ended up getting pulled off in York itself and didn't go to Leeds like it was supposed to. Anyway, instead I had to wait 20 minutes for the coastliner service behind, which was also heading towards Moulton, and this is one of the many quite nice Volvo B5TL Bright Eclipse Gemini 3 vehicles. I will be taking this back to York railway station.
Now approaching Slingsby Grove.
Here I am bailing out on Blossom Street rather than at York railway station outside this really nice Art Deco cinema. I ended up bailing out on Blossom Street just because it's closer to my hotel than York railway station is. Now, I was going to end the video here, but on my last day of being in York, before getting the train back home the next day, I had a bit of spare time in the afternoon, so in the end I went on the City Sightseeing York Open Top service, which is also operated by Transdev and is supposedly operated under their Coastliner brand. Evidently not, as all of the buses that I've ever seen on the service were City Sightseeing branded vehicles, and I'm not too sure why you'd ever get Coastliner buses on here anyway. Now, just like with a few other buses I went on in my other video, which you might not have seen yet, where I end up going to Whitby and Scarborough on the bus and end up returning on the train, I was more interested in the bus operating the service than the tour itself.
They'll always be doing so much. It's crazy.
On the right-hand side of the road is disease, but one spread through contaminated water. We are now entering the Memorial Gardens, where there is a bus stop close to the National Railway Museum. The War Memorial to the right was designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens and
Here I am near
commemorates more than
Station
1,000
Avenue once again,
servicemen from
where the
York
40
who
service
were
to
killed
Easing
fighting
World
in the
that I
First
took
World
earlier
War.
on in the video picks
The
up and
city's
drops
annual
off
service
at.
of remembrance
On that
is
service
held
today
every
was a nice Volvo B90L Bright Eclipse Gemini 2. Now I had an absolutely smashing time up here in York and in the surrounding area, but the one type of bus I wish I managed to get on was a Volvo B90L, which is the one type of bus that I wanted to get on that I didn't. Anyway, Here I am trundling through York City Centre on this ADL Enviro 400. We used to have some similar
crossing the
ADL
bridge,
Enviro
the next
400s
bus
in
stop is a
Somerset,
great one
though
for the
those were
city
ex-London,
centre, the
and although I think
riverside
these are
and
as
the
well,
museum gardens.
those buses we used to have in
There's a
Somerset
street on the
were
right
absolutely
leading to the
knackered.
shops,
And
the
funnily
famous
enough,
Betty's Tea
although
Room
these are
and
only
the
a year
Mansion
older,
House.
these didn't
The
rattle and
gates on the
clatter
left
like
lead
the
into
old
the
Somerset
contains
ones
one of
used to,
York's
so
two South
that was quite a
African war
welcome sight,
memorials,
to be honest,
along with
or
the
should I
city's
say a
largest
welcome
Roman Catholic
sound.
church, St Wilfrid's, completed in 1864. This brings us into Exhibition Square, a great stop for city centre attractions, with the York Art Gallery on your left and the way onto the city walls on your right. This is also the closest stop for York Minster, which is
Here
just
I am
through
pulling
the archway
into
on your
Exhibition
right, beneath
Square,
the city
right in
wall
the heart
staircase.
of York City
It's
Centre.
a short walk
Here
back to
the
the
bus will
shops,
pull over for a
cafes and
couple of
pubs from here
minutes,
too.
and here you get to see some of the
Thank you to anyone
rivalry
leaving
you
us at
get,
this
not
point.
just in
We
York,
hope
but
that
in
you
the
have
whole of
enjoyed your tour with
Yorkshire.
York City Sightseeing.
Right here at Exhibition Square, although I didn't get it on camera, there was a stand for the City Sightseeing York service operated by Transdev. Then right next to it was a stand for the Golden Tour service operated by York Pullman, which is part of First Bus, or rather First York, so that was quite interesting to see. And funnily enough, when I got off the bus back at the railway station, just about 5 minutes after the York City Sightseeing bus left, a Golden
We are on a
Tours bus
street called
with nobody on it
Gillygate, named
arrived,
after
so
the Church of
obviously
St
something
Giles,
strange
which
is
once
going
stood
on
in the
there.
area of
Surely
the
they should
Victorian
operate
Salvation
a
Army
timetable where they
Citadel on your
alternate between
left at the
services
end of the
like they
street.
do in Bath,
A
where
church
High
may have
Experiences
existed on the
Ltd
site in the
operate in
1100s, but
coordination
nothing now
with
remains of the building. The
I
churchyard
think it's
seems
Toot
to
Bus
have been in
services
use
that
to bury
First Bus
plague
operate
victims in
rather than
1605
operating
and
in
perhaps
competition
executed
with each other,
criminals until
if that whole thing that I just
1693.
said makes sense.
Despite Gillygate being medieval in origin, most of the buildings on the street date from the 17th of them, keeping you close to the city's centre attractions and some of our bus stops. The ditch below us on the right is one of the most impressive features of York's medieval defences. A water-filled ditch was constructed in the early 1200s alongside the lengths of wall not protected by the rivers, adding an extra layer of defence.
Here I am arriving into York Stonebow, where you can change for other local bus services, including the Coastliner services via Moulton to Scarborough or Pickering, Thornton Liddell and Whitby, and here you can also alight for York Minster and the very historic city centre area.
Came from across Britain to negotiate deals in York with local wool traders, a major industry in the city at one point, hence the name of the premises. Once a coaching inn, horses were stabled at the rear of the building in Lady Peckett's yard, named after the wife of John, the one-time owner of the premises and Lord Mayor in the early 1700s. Lady Alice Peckett is said to be one of the numerous ghosts. Her heavy footsteps can be heard roaming the staircases and corridors of the pub. Another spectre is One-Eyed Jack, supposedly seen dressed in a red coat and tricorn hat, pacing up and down the bar and carrying a pistol.
Next on the right we have two Victorian buildings. The first is now the York Dungeon, a theatrical
We can now see Fishergate Boston Tower, which will be passing on our right-hand side as we turn around this end section of the city walls. An interesting feature to spot is the long vertical stone shaft sticking out from this side of the tower on the right. This is the guardrail, the medieval toilet. Also look for a small archway. This is the postern, and it once had a portcullis. The huge stone tower was built at the start of the 1500s, but it is not the first one to stand on this site. It has 4 floors linked by a spiral staircase and is one of the 6 original postern towers that defended the city. York Castle was divided from Fishergate Postern Tower by the River Foss, which was much broader than it is now. The water came right up to the edge of the tower.
Better access when the cattle market moved to the area.
We will shortly be in the Fishergate area of the city, where the remains of wooden antlers and buildings have been found.
So every child in Japan is given a Kit Kat before they sit an exam, and the grown-ups get them before a driving test or an interview. Their Kit Kats are very small and are available in a huge array of flavours. They've tried over 400 flavours, but not all at the same time, including green tea, wasabi, and smoked salmon.
When you're in York, there is history all around you, with 2,000 listed buildings. And the history of York begins almost 2,000 years ago with the Romans, back when they built a fortress and an adjacent town known as Ioraka, between the rivers Foss and Ouse. That was the first name the city had. Next, it became...
If you look to the right, you will see two huge archways in the city walls. These were built to allow...
Here I am arriving back at York railway station after spending an hour on that City Sightseeing York open top service, which is very nice. But there was one thing that I wanted to do before I finished up for the day, and that was to try and get a ride on that Scania N230UD Omni City that I missed out on earlier in the week because it broke down. Although saying that, fair play to Connections buses for getting a replacement bus on. That was the Stephensons of Essex Scania N250UD MMC in such quick time. Although saying that they might have had a depot nearby, I'm not too sure. But that is amazing when you consider that Transdev didn't put a replacement bus on for my service that evening from Cotmanthorpe back into York City Centre. But to get out to Cotmanthorpe, to get a ride on that Scania Omnicity, I had to get another ride on a Volvo B5TL. I was starting to get bored on these, especially after spending nearly 3 hours on one the day before heading to Whitby.
We're now approaching the Marriott Hotel.
Here I am back at
The next stop
Cotmanthorpe,
is
this time at Tadcaster Road, or at least at the Tadcaster Road bus stops. Now although here I had a fairly tight connection, I still made the Scania N230UD Omnicity. This is a bit of a stranger in the Connections buses fleet, as it wears the Super 13 livery, and I believe it is the only double-decker to do so. There are 2 or 3 Volvo B8R Rally MCV Auroras that wear the livery, as well as a Scania L94UB Wright Solar, which I was hoping would be out on the Super 13, but most of the time it was actually out in the neighbouring city of Leeds rather than on the Super 13 here in York. But nevertheless, the Scania Omnicity was just as good, if not better. The drive was nice and fast, the bus was actually relatively comfortable for a Scania Omnicity, and by the looks of the interior, it was ex-stagecoach, so that was quite nice to see as well. Here I am arriving back at York railway station for the final time. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned because if it hasn't come out yet, it will come out very soon. And that is my video where I head on as many buses as I possibly can around Whitby and Scarborough. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and as that Scania Omnicity heads off towards Caxby, I will see you in the next one. Bye everyone!